You're right. I think public speaking is a skill like any other, and you can treat any moment in your life as a stage,
Yes.
right? Right now is a stage. The people who are listening into to this conversation, that's a live, I mean, live as can be audience, right? That is consuming this content. And so podcasting for sure is one of our biggest stages in my business and that I practice public speaking on all the time. Having sales calls, when a lot
Mhm.
of our as a media company, a lot of our revenue comes from our brand partners. And so when I'm on a sales call with like a corporate partner to pitch them for a campaign or whatever it might be, that's a stage for
Mhm.
public speaking, right? When I host events, that's a stage for public speaking stage. And that was public speaking for my own events. But I've also hosted, intimate coffee meetups. That's
Mhm.
public speaking when you're sitting at a table and sharing your ideas. It's really just about practicing verbalizing what's in your head. So don't discount any opportunity as, oh, this isn't big enough or it doesn't count because it's not formalized or it's not paid or whatever it might be. Public speaking is an everyday practice. It's not just something that happens when you step on a physical stage in front of hundreds or thousands of people.
You're listening to Madam Speaker Says, your no fluff cheat code to becoming the voice everyone listens to. I'm your host, Machochodi. If you've been waiting for a permission slip to straighten your crown and take up space like you invented the blueprint, Madam Speaker Says got you covered. No whispers, no apologies, just you, me, and some bold ass moves. Let's get into it. Welcome, everybody. This is Madam Speaker Says, and I'm your host. I am Machochodi. This is a podcast where we go behind the scenes of storytelling and we speak to women of color, people at the margins who are badasses. Like today, okay, the person that we're speaking to is like the platonic ideal of what we're talking about. When we're talking about a woman of color who is a business leader who thoroughly understands how you need to build your own thought leadership in order to do difficult things and to be disruptive. This is the podcast where you get the tea on that. And today, ladies and gentlemen, okay, today, my guest is Ellen Yin. I told her at the very beginning, I am such a fangirl. Ellen, I have been listening to your podcast for the literal longest. I have learned, I have to tell the people this thing. I
Please.
have a lot of degrees. Okay, I have a lot of fancy degrees from a lot of very fancy, expensive schools. And I have learned more from listening to Ellen and her guests on Cubicle to CEO than I have at I won't even mention the school because I don't want to embarrass them.
Wait, now I'm like, wait, this is we're spilling the tea, right? So what's the school? Putting you on the spot.
Sure. I've taken business classes at like the best,
Yeah.
MBA level. I mean, what you're doing and how you're moving lives and how you see people, especially women of color who are at the margins, who do have the power and the capacity to become the kind of financially resourced people that your whole community is about. People, we're talking about somebody who within her first year of business had already hit 100K mark. And she was not even 25 yet. And
This
then
is
when she was
like
around 25, she was like, oh, make that a million. Okay.
Mahahodi, you are, oh my goodness. I love that you did your research. First off, as a fellow podcast host, I appreciate and respect that so much. Before we hit record, you guys, she was telling me how she found like dug way back in the
Oh,
internet
yeah.
archives all the way to, finding a video of me when I was like 15 and who knows what I was doing as a
Oh, yeah.
teenager on the internet. But I appreciate your thoroughness and I'm so, so honored to join you on your show. So thank you for all your kind words.
You are so welcome. And we're going to dive right in because there's so much to learn from you. The first question I want to ask you, and it's the same question I ask almost all of my guests, right?
Mm.
Why is thought leadership so important, specifically for women of color, but really for women of color who own businesses and are serious about business? Because I don't know that every businesswoman understands herself as a thought leader, right? I
Mhm.
think a lot of times of all the multiple hats. Thought leadership is not necessarily the forefront. I want you to tell the people for you, what does that mean? Why is that important?
Well, it's so interesting you say that, a lot of women don't think of themselves as thought leaders because to be fully transparent, even, 8 years now into building my business, I never really I never really think of myself as a thought leader first in the sense that like I'm not sitting down to be like, what content can I create that develops my thought leadership this week, right? It's not so much the outcome that I'm reaching for so much as it is the byproduct of what happens when you build in public and you bring people into your process. And I think that's what I've been doing for all the years I've owned a business, but even long before, like we just joked about, right? I've been creating content and talking about what I'm doing, what I'm learning, what I'm thinking for, well over at this point 15 years ever since I was a teenager and started doing this. So people have seen me through many evolutions, but I think the reason thought leadership is so vital is because it is an extension of you sharing your perspective with the world, right?
Mhm.
And there
Mhm.
are so many experts in the world that can teach on things. You may be one of many in your industry or in your niche that has expertise on a subject, but no one has your lived experiences. And even if someone has similar lived experiences to you, let's say, the way that you process those experiences and how you actually talk about them either out loud or in written format comes across different. It's the reason that we connect with different people, even if they may be talking about similar things. And so I think it's just so important to let your voice be heard. And if you feel intimidated because you don't think of yourself as a thought leader and you're like, I don't have anything profound to share with the world, maybe it would help you to kind of approach it the way I have, where it's not so much about trying to be a thought leader, but more so just genuinely and authentically sharing your process and your thinking as you move through life and your business. And that by default kind of creates thought leadership.
That is so good. So good. That definition, right? And I want to break it down for the person who's listening because you just said that thought leadership isn't actually having the holy grail to say. It is you in action over time and building that muscle of thought leadership through your body of work. But the other thing that you just said is it's a combination of your expertise, your process, and your lived experience. Point
Mhm.
me to a human being who doesn't have all of those things. Like all five
Right.
of those things are something every single human being has. So I'm saying this because a lot of women actually shy away from this idea of being a thought leader, and for good reason. We don't want to replicate the fuddy-duddy traditional thing of thought leadership that existed before, right? We want to do
Mhm.
something different, but we don't want to be intimidated by it. We want to acknowledge that the way that you're doing it, it is the right way. It is the only way
Mhm.
that you can do it. So, stop shying away and do the thing the way that you're doing. That definition is gold and it is a
Mhm.
masterclass. And you also speak in your definition about sometimes we are afraid, right, of what we're stepping into. And you also speak about something else that I do want to get into in a little bit, which is building in public. In a moment, I'm going to put a pin in the conversation because we're going to return to that. But first, I want to talk about what's at stake when you do open your mouth, because I think those things are related. Understanding that you are a thought leader and you don't have to be intimidated by it, right? It can just be literally like the way that you kiki with your girls over the kitchen table, bring that energy. Okay? We love that energy. People need to see the real you. But when you open your mouth as somebody who is building a business and with intention, what's at stake? And I'm asking this because I know you have a really fantastic public speaking career that's part of how you've built your brand. When you speak, what's at stake, either on the stage? And I have a follow-up question to that as well.
Ooh, this is a great conversation, I think. Um, to me, when you allow your voice to be heard, right, especially if you are sharing something that may not be, you know, may not be widely accepted by everyone. I think you have to be okay with the fact that there will always be criticism. Even honestly, when you share I know the thing these days is like unpopular opinion or hot take, right? Honestly, even if you share a popular opinion or, something
Yes.
that people generally agree on, you still open yourself up for feedback, for pushback, for criticism. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, but it's also important to not let that stop you from
Mhm.
speaking your truth.
Mhm.
And more than anything, again, like I said before, when I'm sharing things publicly, it doesn't always have to be for other people. It's not always to get someone else's response or reaction. Now, conversation that naturally happens, that's great and I welcome that. But a lot of times when I am sharing things that I'm going through in real time or processing or learning or building, as we'll come back to later, it really serves just as documentation for my own,
Mhm.
like for my own life, right? Being able to look back on things that happened years ago and have a clear recollection of how my brain thought through problems in that moment. Like you mentioned earlier, when I started my business, I was only 23 years old. I've been documenting from the very beginning, and it's such a privilege and it's such a gift, honestly, to be able to go back and listen to a podcast episode that I recorded, let's say in 2019, where I'm going through my income report. I remember I posted my
Yes.
first public income report, right? And I think it was like sometime in 2019, and I'm in such a different headspace and such a more
Mhm.
seasoned entrepreneur now than I was then. But it's so interesting to go back sometimes and hear myself talk about what I was thinking through, the problems I was working through, what I was excited about in that moment in time. I can never recapture that now. I would have honestly long forgotten about all of those things floating in my brain had I not documented them in some public form. And so sometimes I think the gift in and of itself is just being able to reflect later in your life. And that's only possible when you're sharing out loud.
Yes. And something that resonates so powerfully, I know with so many listeners, is the fear of criticism, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I want to have a documentation for myself. I want to have this diary that stretches all the way back to the very beginnings of my entrepreneurial life. But oh my God, are you kidding me? You're asking me in moments where I'm not fully polished. I don't yet have like, girl, your studio. Let's talk about that, right? Like I have the most polished studio. People are afraid of that because
Mm-hmm.
also there's this thing of wanting to put, algorithms have trained us that the only way you show up is when you're completely perfect. There's something that you're saying which is so powerful. You've learned to do it anyway. And what I want
Mm-hmm.
to ask you is there a moment that taught you that? Is there a moment where you put something out and you were judged and you realized like, okay, so that's just on repeat all the time. It doesn't matter what I do. How did you
Mm-hmm.
metabolize that?
I've always had a little bit of delusion. I call it like delusion. Actually,
Delusion.
yeah, exactly. A little bit of delulu. And actually, I didn't say this, but I saw one of my favorite creators, corporate Natalie. She posted a reel the other day where she was like, "I think I was born with a disease of delusional confidence," and I was like, I can relate so much. And it has nothing to do with thinking you're the best. It really is just this I guess like viewpoint on life where you believe that regardless of what the outcome is, you're going to come away with some new
Mhm.
like information or data point or experience that makes it worthwhile to have done the thing. And I actually, my human design, I learn best through experiments. So it makes sense to me why I'm, putting things out there sometimes before I feel fully confident or fully ready. Even you mentioned like the podcast studio when I first started recording the podcast, like it wasn't even video, first of all. So I didn't have to worry about my setting. But a lot of my first episodes were recorded sitting on the floor in my living room with my laptop perched on the couch. And I had my $99 Yeti mic at the time. Like it was nothing glamorous.
Yes.
Some of those episodes were even recorded in my little apartment at the time closet because the sound was better there in an enclosed space. And so I think just remembering that a lot of things you have to go through those kind of unglamorous or ugly steps first to even find clarity on which direction to move. That's the biggest thing that I wish people would understand is people always think clarity comes from planning, but I truly believe clarity can only come through action. You can't plan from like the limited awareness that you have because you only have your past experiences to reflect on, right? So sometimes that really limits our ability to even think through possible solutions or think through possible possibilities. And so I think that the action piece is really, really key. Um, I'm forgetting the other piece of the question you asked me. Could you refresh my memory?
Well, actually, what I wanted to ask that was a tag-on question, but I
Mhm.
didn't speak it out of my mouth yet, is we're speaking about speaking, right?
Yeah.
And how much you need to understand what's at stake when you open your mouth as a leader, right? The
Mhm.
intentionality behind that. What I know is true is, as someone like you who is a public speaker, you also understand all of the moments that that skill, which you use when you're on stage, shows up in multiple different places in your business.
Mhm.
So the follow-on question, which take it whichever direction you like, is where do you public speak off the stage?
Mm. You're right. I think public speaking is a skill like any other, and you can treat any moment in your life as a stage,
Yes.
right? Right now is a stage. The people who are listening into to this conversation, that's a live, I mean, live as can be audience, right? That is consuming this content. And so podcasting for sure is one of our biggest stages in my business that I practice public speaking on all the time. Having sales calls, when a lot
Mhm.
of our as a media company, a lot of our revenue comes from our brand partners. And so when I'm on a sales call with like a corporate partner to pitch them for a campaign or whatever it might be, that's a stage for
Mhm.
public speaking, right? When I host events, that's a stage for public speaking. This past fall, I actually hosted a huge in-person event, like 200 people, and I built, an actual, I didn't, not with my hands, but I hired people, right, to
Yes.
build a stage. And that was public speaking for my own events. But I've also hosted, intimate coffee meetups. That's public speaking when you're sitting at a table and sharing your ideas. It's really just about practicing verbalizing what's in your head. So don't discount any opportunity as, oh, this isn't big enough or it doesn't count because it's not formalized or it's not paid or whatever it might be. I do believe, by the way, in women being paid for speaking. I'm very,
Oh, heck
very
yeah. Oh,
yes.
that's not
I
even.
I feel very strongly about that because I think we often give away so much just because we think we don't deserve to ask for it. So that's a whole sidebar. But yes, there's so many opportunities for public speaking. Public speaking is an everyday practice. It's not just something that happens when you step on a physical stage in front of hundreds or thousands of people.
Absolutely, absolutely. And related to that, let's keep going with the public speaking theme. How
Mhm.
did you get started as a public speaker? How did you go from, and we're going to come back to the podcast because I definitely want to speak about that, but walk us through the first time you got on stage and if there was a bomb moment where you were like, oh man, I'm so in over my head. Tell us about that, but really want to understand how did that become a big avenue and a line item on your revenue?
Yeah, so my first ever true public speaking opportunity was in 2019. I want to say it was September of that year. It was for a women's personal development conference called Spark. My friend Rachel actually was the host of it. She hosted it for a number of years. It no longer exists, unfortunately, but I remember she had put out an open call for speaker applications. And so I was one of dozens of women who had submitted a video audition and I ended up getting selected. I think she selected just a handful of speakers. So it was a huge honor. And that conference, I mean, it was kind of a big leap from no on stage really speaking into that because that was like I think there was like 300 people in that audience and so it was kind of a big first moment but from there immediately following that actually I had applied for another conference that same summer whenever I was submitting and in October I got to speak again at a smaller conference in Minnesota
Mm,
and so that kind of like kick started my public speaking phase, I guess, of my career. But my first paid speaking engagement was
Mhm.
actually something much smaller that I had actually personally pitched. And this is where I recommend people really get creative with how they get their start. So at the time, this was like my second year in business, right? 2019. And
Right.
I was part of this business networking group. And within this business networking group, all of our member dues helped contribute to a small education fund where we as members could, choose where we wanted to invest those funds to all be part of a learning opportunity. And I remember there was some leftover funds in that budget, and I actually went to the chapter president and I was like, "Hey, I would love to teach a social media marketing workshop for our fellow members. This is what it could look like." I think we ended up getting like the country club to sponsor the venue, and then they were able to pay me a small speaker fee. It wasn't about the actual amount of money in that moment in time. It was just getting that proof of concept that yes, I can be paid to share my
Yes.
expertise, right? And so that again kickstarted an entire, I mean, years now of speaking on dozens and dozens of stages all over the country. And these days, I would say 95% of the speaking I do is paid. And we
Mhm.
can talk more about that piece as well. But I tell these stories to share that it doesn't have to start big, right? You can
Mhm.
make the opportunities available for yourself. There are so many organizations probably locally in your city that have small
Mhm.
education budgets or funds that you can go and pitch and say, "Hey, I would like to share, this presentation," and be able to connect it with the work that they're already doing so that they can see how it's supportive of their, current initiatives. But take that initiative to go out and pitch. Don't wait for the opportunities to come find you.
I love that. And I love that you were in your second year of
Mhm.
business, right? To go back to the timeline. So you
Yeah.
began your business, I think around 2017. So 2017,
2018.
2018. In
Yeah.
2019, you pitch and you get paid for the first time.
Mhm.
Was this after you'd already done the non-speaking? So you'd had the experience of non-speaking and then you're like, actually, I could get paid for this? Or was it concurrent?
The two conferences, you mean the non-paid conferences? Is that what you're
Yes.
referring to? Okay.
Yes.
That's a good question. I want to say that the two non-paid conferences happened first, if memory serves correctly. I want to say
Okay.
that the paid workshop happened at the end of that year.
Okay.
Um, don't quote me on that, but I'm like pretty
That makes
positive that
sense.
was the, yeah,
It-
that was the order of events. Yeah.
yeah. And the reason why I'm asking you is I want to understand if you could give advice to somebody else who's listening right now, who's
Mhm.
thinking this is a good idea, this is something that I want to pursue. Would you have, of course, you would have done those first two events,
Mhm.
right? But knowing everything that you do now, do you have to
Mhm.
wait to ask to be paid?
No, I don't think so. It's not so much about, I mean, sure, if you are a paid speaker, regularly, that precedent obviously makes it easier to get paid in the
Of
future,
course.
right? However, I don't think that you have to speak for free before you can get paid as a speaker. I
Right.
think it really depends on circumstance. It depends on like what event you're speaking for, what your expertise is, what you're sharing, who the audience is, what the host budget is. There's so many factors that come into play in that final decision, but I would not ever tell someone as a blanket advice, "Oh, you need to go speak for free before you can get paid." Your expertise is already valued, right? If you are in business, you're already being paid in some form for whatever it is that you are an expert in, your service, your knowledge, your products, whatever it may be. And so this is just, speaking is just a different channel through which you are expressing your expertise. But just because you've never been paid to speak doesn't mean you have, your expertise is somehow discounted because of that.
This is so important. And I tell this to my clients when we're coaching.
Hmm.
You cannot underestimate your expertise from day zero. And the
Yeah.
idea that you haven't done this before, formally speaking on a stage, doesn't mean we just covered it. Okay,
Hmm.
folks. She just walked you through all the different ways that she public speaks in her day to day as a business owner. And that's likely true for the person who's listening to this conversation too.
Right.
Related to what you said, something else I wanted to follow up on is at this stage, the summer of 2020, of 2019, when you
Hmm.
first started speaking, were you making a relationship yet between your speaking and your business? To what
Mm.
extent was your speaking powering your business? And you can answer that for where you are today as well, because one of the things that I see is a lot of entrepreneurs not only leave money on the table and not understanding what you know, somebody will pay you to get on stage, to get on a Zoom and share that expertise, number one.
Yeah.
But number two, and that is thought leadership, folks. Okay. If you don't know what that is, that's what thought leadership is, 101. But number two, that the work that you do through your public speaking, it can be a really powerful engine that jet fuels your business.
Absolutely. And public speaking, I would say, is one of the best ways to hyper nurture relationships.
Mm,
Meaning, if someone spends an hour listening to you in person, they can feel your energy, they can hear your words, they can see, you and how you show up. Their trust in you is so
mm,
different than someone who spends an hour reading your content or engaging with you in a different way. And so I think it really does fast track relationships. And so many of my speaking opportunities have come from other speaking opportunities, right? It's like a snowball rolling downhill. As soon as you speak at one thing, there's another person who asks you to be part of the next thing. And so that momentum really never stops. Um, I would say that whether or not the speaking directly tied to my business kind of depended on the season of my business. I think back when I first started speaking, my business model at the time was very different. I started my business as a freelance social media manager. It grew into like a boutique marketing agency. Then in 2020, we shifted into education. So, coaching programs, courses, products of that nature. And then in 2023, we shifted into our current business model, which is a media company. We still have the education arm of our business, but now we kind of treat our podcast and our newsletter as our products, if you will.
mm,
So
mhm.
anyways, all this to say, in the beginning, when I first started speaking, yes, I would have people, because of that hyper nurture experience I was telling you about, I would have people come up to me after and be like, oh my gosh, I loved your talk today. That was so helpful. How can I work with you? Like, what do you offer? Like, so people would
Mhm.
definitely ask. I would book calls with potential clients off of that. But it wasn't because I was selling from stage. Like, I never on stage was like, hey, and if you want to work with me, this is what I do. And here's how you can contact me. It was just naturally, people naturally gravitated towards me after a talk and would, ask, how can I stay connected in your world? I think these days, as a paid speaker, where speaking is an actual revenue source in our business, things look a little bit different now, and especially because we no longer offer coaching programs. Like all of our education, right, is like self-paced or self-guided, unless we do some sort of like live virtual
Mhm.
experience as a one-off. Um, so I think nowadays with our speaking, it's more of a way to lead people into our community, into our world, to get on
Mhm.
our newsletter list,
Mhm.
to, listen to our podcast, and then they kind of swirl deeper and deeper
Yes.
into our world from there. So it's more of like an awareness model for us now. And I'm already compensated as a speaker, so I don't also need to then find a way to monetize the speaking on the back end immediately.
That's excellent. And I think that's relevant to so many people who are listening, right? Because we can get in our heads so much about, well, what do I speak about when I'm on stage? How do I think about hosting a keynote? How do I think about a workshop based on the work that I'm currently doing? And I love what you're saying, which is focus first on building the relationship with the
Yeah.
people in the audience. And one
Mhm.
word that you said, which is literally my gold star, is trust. And how
Yes.
important it is to build trust, both with the audience, but also I have to tell you, Ellen, as somebody who listens to your podcast,
Mhm.
I have felt that level of you trust and building trust with your community, extending not just to a live audience, but also to an audience that's with you every single week through
Yeah.
emails, right? Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit more about the intentionality there? But specifically, I really want to hone in on, again, we're going back now to the beginning of the podcast days.
Mhm.
I want to understand how you think about building the podcast and supercharging the podcast through community, which the bedrock of
Mhm.
that has to be trust.
Yes, absolutely. So I think what has helped us with our podcast, one is our intense commitment to consistency. A lot of podcasts
Mhm.
don't even make it past the first 10 episodes. And those that do, you'll often see, hosts kind of come and go off hiatus. It's like always up in the air whether the podcast is a thing, is not a thing. We have committed to publishing a new episode every Monday for the last 6 years
Mhm.
without fail, except for I think one intentional break that we took when we were kind of shifting the format of our show. But other than planned short pauses, our podcast has never missed a Monday. And so I think just even thinking through how podcast listening is a built-in, it's a behavior, right? Like you said, people like you who show up week after week after week to listen, that expectation and you following through on your commitment, right? You pick up our show on Mondays expecting a new episode to drop. Every single Monday that a new episode drops, we are showing through our actions that we are trustworthy because we are
Mhm.
following through on that commitment. So I think it starts there, but then community becomes a natural piece of those shared conversations, right? And bringing people behind the scenes of not only our business, because for like 5 years we publicly shared our income reports every quarter. We really brought people in behind the scenes to exactly
Mhm.
what we were doing in our company in a way that, I mean, not everyone is comfortable or wants to do that. So I am not by any means saying that is the only way to build trust, but it is a core foundation of why our listeners trust us so
Mhm.
much because they've really seen it all behind the scenes with us, right? And then we also follow that same format with our guests on the show where they're sharing behind the scenes case studies on strategies they're testing in real time, their real data, their real revenue and numbers. And I think that's what our show has become known for, is like financially transparent content related to behind the business case studies. And so I think all of these things compounded really have built a strong level of trust with our community. And same thing as what I was sharing earlier about how thought leadership wasn't necessarily the goal. It's just kind of the byproduct
Yep.
of building in public. In the same way, I think community is not the goal, it's the
Mhm.
byproduct, right? It's a byproduct of
Mhm.
creating um, relevant conversations, quality products, consistent follow through, all of those things as a byproduct build community over time. And then I think introducing layers like hosting our own in person events, hosting our own virtual events only further solidified the connection that our listeners have with us beyond the podcast.
This is so good. So, so good. And it's a
Yeah.
masterclass, right? Here's how you build a podcast that's got the community buzzing. You are consistent over time
Mhm.
and you respect that the person on the other end who is in relationship with you has a commitment. So are you going to keep your commitment? You
Mhm.
offer really relevant conversations, and in that you do work that is behind the scenes. I want to push a little bit more on that and ask,
Yeah.
but in a moment I just want to offer this as well, the case studies and the financial transparency with the guests that further deepens the trust that you're building. What
Mhm.
I wanted to circle back to is this thing that you did, which was 5 years of financial transparency, is like a holy what the stop the brakes, right? Because for
Yeah.
a lot of people, that would put the fear of living ancestors inside of them. Like, you want me to do what? You want me to do who?
Yeah.
Take me to the moment where you decided to be that vulnerable publicly, because no matter what,
Mm.
whether you're the kind of person and you were blessed with that beautiful disease of like, I'm so confident at birth, right? You still, I mean, we live in a society where that is not a thing that everybody is doing, right? So,
Yes.
how did you make the decision? What did you learn from being that vulnerable publicly? Because I
Mhm.
think that knowing that and teasing that out is helpful to the person on the other end who is sitting on top of a gold mine of information that may be transgressive to how society typically thinks, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
thought leadership typically comes from places where you're doing something that is here's the current and there's you moving against the current, right?
Mm. Yeah.
So walk us through that whole decision making, what you learned, all the yummy things.
It was honestly a way to pay it forward. And let me give you a little context around that. In the beginnings of my own entrepreneurship journey, pretty early on, I discovered a few creators who were writing income reports. And so one, I have to give a shout out to Elise Dharma. She was doing that at the time. I don't think she has in a number of years, but in 2018, 2019, when I was first, learning things, I came across some of her written reports. And then my dear friend Haley Burkhead, or Haley Bree now, she also at the time was sharing income reports through like a video, like a live stream every month. And so these two people, I learned so much. I'm someone who learns through experiments. So
Yes.
I learned so much from hearing other people's experiences as well. It's why our show is like a case study format for exactly that
Mhm.
reason, because like I also previously mentioned in our conversation, you don't know what you don't know. And so when you're, viewing things from your limited perspective because you've had limited experiences in a certain arena, sometimes you don't even know the right questions to ask. You don't even know to ask things like, oh, if I reach this certain revenue point, like what are the typical expenses related to producing revenue at
Mhm.
this level? Or where are the best places to spend my dollars? Or what profit margin should I be striving for? And what should I be aiming to protect? How much should I save for taxes? All of these questions are things that like you just wouldn't know until you've experienced them, or someone who's already experienced them would tell you through their own lens and their own, lived experiences. And so because I gained so much from reading and consuming other people's income reports, I just felt like I had to pay that forward. I had to share with other people who might benefit in the same way. And I think we all benefit, honestly, when we come to the table transparently in talking about our numbers and talking about money. I think money is the reason there's so much financial illiteracy in the world, and the reason that especially women of
Mhm.
color often are not resourced well to build wealth and generational wealth is actually because of our lack of information about it. And so I think having access to that information and democratizing access to that information is essential to moving forward and making progress in those arenas. And so that was kind of my initial intention for starting this. I started it off as monthly email reports in early 2019, and then I posted my first quarterly income report. I think it was was that summer of 2019? I think it must have been summer of 2019. It was like shortly after I started the podcast. And then from there, starting in 2020, I was regularly every quarter sharing income reports. And I did that all the way through the end of 2024, I believe. So about five full years of this practice. And it was challenging at times. You're right. It wasn't always easy to lay bare, everything happening in our business, because it's not, because our growth isn't linear either, right? Like there's
Yes.
ups and downs, and there's, mistakes that I made that I shared publicly with our audience. And, I mean, we were very detailed. Like I literally would base my income reports off the P&Ls that my accountant would send me. So the numbers were very accurate, very detailed. And, all of this, what was a practice of vulnerability, but I don't regret any of it because, again, if for nothing else, I mean, we've gotten tons of feedback from people who have said that those income reports have helped them. But even if I had not received any feedback like that, just for my own purposes, like I mentioned, of documentation,
Yes.
that in and of itself was enough to make those efforts worthwhile.
Yes. Do you see a through line between anything in your business today that is an aha or wow, we
Mhm.
leapfrogging in a direction I hadn't anticipated that traces back to that decision?
That's a great question. I mm, I don't know if there's like one direct example of this, but I think there's a lot of like butterfly effect things that happened
Mhm.
because of that. For
Mhm.
example, even going back to speaking, I think there were a lot of people that really trusted me as a business owner and as, an expert, because it wasn't just like smoke and mirrors, like a lot, especially in the online business space, a lot of things that you hear are smoke and mirrors. And so I think the fact that people could actually see behind the scenes and knew that the things that, we were teaching in our products, or the things that I was saying online, actually matched like what was really happening behind the scenes.
Mhm.
And even further so, like for example, not this past summer, but the summer before, I actually had a feature in Business Insider. And for media like that, you actually have to submit your tax returns. Like they will
Mhm.
verify that the
Mhm.
numbers that you're saying are really true. And so,
Yes.
like, even anything like that, right, comes from years of building up this credibility. And I think all of that has impact in the ways in which people view you or the opportunities that land on your doorstep. So yes, absolutely. I think it's impacted my business in a huge way, but I don't have the detailed records to be like point A led to point B,
Right.
in this many
Right.
ways. But without a doubt, I can say like I think it for sure had a through line in many opportunities I'm sure that have landed in our business.
The imagery that you use, the butterfly effect,
Hmm.
is so powerful because a lot of us understand what that means. It's a
Yeah.
small seed that you plant, and you have no idea how far-reaching and intergalactic, multiple continents this little
Yeah.
butterfly is going to touch. I want to harp on that for the person who's listening, because if you are afraid of what you have to say, right? If
Hmm.
it does feel like, oh, having to be vulnerable. If you hear Ellen's story and you just got a cold shiver about like, do I now have to put all of my P&L online, for
Absolutely not.
years? No,
Just saying.
no, you absolutely don't have to. If you're
Yeah.
inspired to, please do by all means. And there's a playbook.
Mhm.
You can listen to all of her episodes that cover that. But I do want to point out the importance of leaning into your edge, leaning into your vulnerability and how you show up on your platforms in
Mhm.
order to grow not just trust with your community, but really you have no fucking idea where that's going to take you. You just have no idea.
Yeah.
You have no idea.
Yes.
And you have to have the trust at first, right? Before you
Mhm.
see it, that is part of your journey and that will pay off in dividends that you can't see today, but you do have to have that level of trust. That's such an important point that you're making. I want to talk something else about the podcast. One of
Mhm.
the things, like I said, I have been through, business school. I understand the case study model. And what I love about what you're doing is it's so granular and
Mhm.
it's so actionable. This is something that we can use today. A little bit different from a lot of MBA programs, which
Mhm.
tend to focus on,
Theory, right?
excuse me, theory. And even when we're talking about a case study, we're talking about Starbucks. We're talking about, I don't know, Away, the
Yeah.
luggage company. But we're not talking about them when they were a startup baby. We're talking about them today when you see ads for them in every single airport and when they've completely revolutionized how people think about their luggage. What I
Yeah.
think is brilliant that you're doing at Cubicle to CEO is you're saying, those case studies are fantastic and you could learn a lot from them. But let's zero in on the person who is starting right now, something that looks like a solopreneurship business, something that
Mhm.
might look like you've got a small team around you. And what I want to understand, because again, this is about thought leadership. How do you build a platform for yourself? Where
Mm.
did that kernel come from? Was it even before the podcast started? You already knew, okay, bet I'm gonna work on these case studies. Harvard. You're basically like Harvard. Checkmate. I've got this. Or
I mean, that would be pretty cool. Okay, I actually have a funny story for you, Mahodi, about this. Okay, when I was a high school senior, right? Like when I was applying for colleges, I actually only applied for one Ivy League. It was Yale. And of course, I'm sure there was a small piece of that that had to do with my obsession with Gilmore Girls, right? Of course, we all wanted to be Rory back then. And anyways, I intended originally to go to school for journalism, and Yale has an excellent journalism program. So anyways, applied, didn't get in, spoiler alert. But it was funny because all these years later, speaking of Harvard, I can't remember. This must have been like 1 or 2 years ago. We run programmatic ads on on our free episodes of our show, and uh one day I was listening in, and it was a ad for Harvard Business School popped up, and I was like, that is so funny. And I posted this like TikTok where I was like, when you're delusional because you got like rejected from an Ivy League school, but then now they advertise on
love
your
that.
podcast, right? So you never know what's going to happen when you start something, and I think that really truly is the key to everything here is I did not start the podcast even as a case study format show. I started it really just having kind of conversational coffee chat style things. But I realized over time as I was building this podcast, okay, every business show out there basically has like conversational chats or like ask the same
Mhm.
questions. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever noticed this. Those of you listening in, I'm sure you're nodding your head because you can relate to this. If you listen to multiple business podcasts, you'll notice sometimes that like one founder or entrepreneur will go on this like visibility tour, right? They'll go on
Yes.
like 10,
Oh,
20,
yes.
30 podcasts. And if you listen to all of their interviews on these podcasts, they're basically regurgitating the same thing every single time. And so somewhere like, okay, so I think this was end of 2022. We started the podcast in 2019, right? So we'd already been doing this for at this point 4 years. We realized we want to differentiate ourselves as a show. We want to be the show where we ask successful entrepreneurs the business questions you can't Google. So if you can find out someone's founder story just by reading about them on Google, or if you can listen to 100 other podcasts and hear them talking about their same 5-step signature framework, we don't want to talk about that on our show, right? There's already content that exists for that. So that's when we actually brought in case studies and we really narrowed it down to, okay, we're going to break down one specific strategy every single episode that grew someone's audience, their team time, their revenue, profits, whatever it looked like. And that clarity, that realization, and that refinement of our show process could not have happened when I first launched the show in 2019. It was vitally important that I stumble my way through figuring out exactly how our show is different to then arrive where we are now. I don't think I could have planned it from the beginning. And that's speaking back to the points that we've been talking about this entire conversation, is that you must experiment and you must take action in order to find clarity later on. It doesn't always come from the planning at the beginning.
That, I mean, I was gonna say that, but you just took the words straight out of my mouth, which is what you said at the beginning. Thought
Mm,
leadership is action. You don't get to the case study without fumbling through or making your way through the first couple seasons, or however you think about that podcast at the very beginning,
yeah.
to then have Harvard Business School itself knocking on your door and being like, "Hi, would you like our advertising dollars, please? Will you please take them, Ellen?" So I promised that we were going to circle back, and here's the full circle to young Ellen, teenager,
Mm,
at the piano, playing covers, and you were doing this consistently and putting it out on the internet, right? This is
yeah.
the way in which you have, I mean, at this point, it's almost going to be like the better part of the time that you have spent on earth,
Mhm.
learning in public and showing in public, here's what I'm going through. And that only compounding the level of trust that people have in you, right?
Yes.
What I want to understand, because here's the other thing that I know about you, which I find really, really fascinating and intriguing. You graduate from college, you are this bright, young, shiny woman, and you figure out a way to pay your debt off,
Mm,
$19,000.
mhm.
Then you go a step further. You have an article written about you in a regional paper that, like, makes some waves. And then
Mhm.
later on, we see you with Hoda and Jenna, and there you are with your husband being like these really wonderful models and guinea pigs as they do like a style show about people who are creative.
Mm,
All of these different touch points to me show me somebody who is a master. It's not a surprise that the company that you're building has touched thousands of people in
mm,
helping them understand here's how marketing works. But you're also a beast at PR, which is related to marketing, right?
mhm,
That you got that article at that young age, that you understood the power of YouTube as a teenager, that you also understood, wait, this is me being a model on this particular segment, but like, yeah, we're going to do this, honey. I
mhm.
want to hear the conversation to you and your husband.
Well, it's funny you say my husband is actually a very private person. When we first met, he just funny story. When we first met, he didn't even have a working cell phone. Like the only way you could reach him outside of work, because we met at work.
I already love this dude.
Yeah, right. He's the best. He's like off the grid. Like the only way you could get in touch with him would be to literally drive to his front door and knock on his door outside of work. And so he's very much the opposite of me. He begrudgingly has an inactive, really, Instagram, but he's really not on socials. He's not like a public figure in any way. And so I love it. I think our opposites complement each other very,
Yes,
very well.
100%.
But all this to say, yes, you're right. I mean, I'm 31 years old at the time of this recording. I started creating content on YouTube when I was 14 years old. Now, if you're listening to this and you're like, wait, I'm gonna search this up. I already told Mahodi before we hit record. I have archived almost all of that content on YouTube, so you'll probably find very little of it. But it was a music channel, and again, so unrelated to anything I'm doing today. But it's not about, the subject matter. It was just the practice, the consistent practice of creating content, learning in public, sharing things that I'm working on. And that skill has followed me into, college, into my post-grad years, into
Yes.
entrepreneurship and all of these things. And so I think there is that tie and connection through all of this. But yes, speaking to the article that came out, it was in the Penny Hoarder, which is like this national publication, huge personal finance website. And how I actually got that opportunity was they rebranded, so I don't remember what it's called now, but it used to be called Help a Reporter Out, right? It's this like database where journalists can submit requests for quotes or experts or sources on different articles that they're working on. And so there was a writer who was writing about people paying off debt, and it was going into my senior year of college when I kind of discovered the world of personal finance, and I got really serious about wanting to pay off my $19,000 in student loan debt before I graduated at the end of that year. So I went all in on my debt payoff journey that year. I worked multiple jobs. I applied for like every scholarship under the sun, and I did it. I did it in 10 months. I actually paid off as a full-time student all of those loans. So I actually did graduate college debt free. And that opportunity that I found on that platform, I ended up pitching the journalist and I said, "Hey, here's my story." And she loved it. And so that's what got me that coverage. But PR has been an important part of my business from the very beginning, because it's one thing for you to tell your story and show up as a thought leader, but it's also an entirely different level of authority and credibility when someone else with their own platform elevates you, right? An established platform, especially giving credence to what you're saying, what you're working on. And so I think that media aspect is a skill that all of us as entrepreneurs should really master, in addition to our own thought leadership.
Absolutely. And it really harks back to what you said at the very beginning, the through line that I'm hearing. And this is why I brought up all of those instances. You just gave us a 3-minute masterclass in how to be a PR advocate for your own business is pitching. You really have to understand and master the art of raising your hand and saying, hey, you have a speaking opportunity. Actually, you didn't even have a speaking opportunity at that point. You created the speaking opportunity by pitching the local council where you were already a part of and the local businesses and saying, hey, this is something that we could do. And also, by the way, you should pay me and here's my rate, right?
Yeah.
And you knew how to do that then. You definitely know how to do that now. You've just given people a playbook on how to do it. And this is exactly the kind of work that Madam Speaker says is so passionate about in our coaching. You are not only somebody who builds a platform, you're also a thought leader when other people look to you and say, Ellen, I admire what you do so much. And I learned about it through Fortune 500. I learned about it through this third party. And you need to know how to be able to do that. Ellen, before we wrap up, I have a rapid fire that's going to close us out. And
Ooh.
I want to just thank you from all of the bottom of all the things. Okay, all of the internet heart here is wide open. And thank you so much for being on the podcast, for sharing so transparently. I want to thank you for sharing transparently on this platform, but I really want to thank you for sharing transparently on Cubicle to CEO. It
Thank you.
is it is an education, right? And it is also a community. Excuse me. Oh my God. I'm
No,
getting
it's
all
okay.
choked up.
Oh, if you need to take a water,
No, I'm
breather or
getting
water.
all choked
Okay.
up. I'm getting
Oh.
all choked up with like how much gratitude there genuinely is. And I want to thank you for coming onto this podcast and blessing us with so much wisdom. There's nuggets for especially the person who is in business and doesn't yet understand how to build and leverage the power of your own voice. I always say this. The marketing tool that you are least using at the back pocket is your own story.
Mm,
You're not leaning enough into your own story. And Ellen, through this podcast, has given you so many different places where you can shine, right? Through your lived experience, through your story, and bring people into you. So, before we jump into rapid fire, please tell folks about a project that you're really excited about to, follow that's coming up maybe in the next quarter. I personally want to put in a plug for Bloom Together
mm,
because there's a tick on almost all of the things that I love. It is a gathering that centers women, right? And specifically women of color feel like they are one of many when we are
mm.
in that room. It is gorgeous, okay? It makes Instagram drool whenever you put things like highlights from the event into the reel, into the feed. It is so beautiful and it's substantive because Alanin is behind it. People
Mm.
are there to learn, people are there to connect, and it happens only once a year. So
Well,
if
actually, it was a one-time event. Yeah, so it really was a give back to our community. So we will host more events in the future, and we would love for any of you listening to be part of those events. So we do have an events wait list. You can go to cubicle2ceo.co/ I think it's slash events wait list. I'm pretty sure. But anyways, or maybe it's just slash events. Anyways, just go to
it
that
will
link.
be
I'm
in show
sure
notes. It will be in show notes.
it'll be in show notes, yes. But yes, Bloom Together was an incredible experience, and we loved bringing our people together in person. There's just something so different, right? I joked with many of my friends after. I was like, it felt like my second wedding because like literally because like I mean Dustin and I got married 2 years ago, right? But like being in that venue again, it was actually a wedding venue, and all
Mm,
these people here from all different chapters of my life and my business. It really felt like I was getting to have another
yes.
like wedding 2.0. And so it was a wonderful experience. But as far as projects that we're working on in the near future, so you will hear this on the podcast on Monday, our podcast this
Yes.
coming Monday. So in just a few days from now, but we are making a big change to our show in 2026. Long story short, if you want to hear the full details, just go listen on our podcast. But a long story short, we've been doing this podcast as a free gift, really, to our community as a labor of love for the last 6 years. And it has been such a ride. But where we want to go with this show moving forward, there are so many things that we've wanted to invest in to improve, to continue and to improve the production of our show, the caliber of guests that we bring on, the case studies that we have access to. But none of it is really possible in terms of expansion without additional funding. And so we're
Mm,
actually going to be debuting our premium podcast feed for our show. So our case studies that we're known for, that we invest so much time and money and labor into every week, those are actually going to become exclusive content for our paid subscribers. And then we'll continue to have like monthly bonus content that's free to the public. And we're also leaving our entire back catalog of like 400 episodes
beautiful.
free for the public as well. So that's our big thing that we're working on right now. I go into a lot more detail behind the why of this decision. If you're curious, if you're someone who likes to learn how founders think through challenges and how they think about planning, future planning, I think you'll find this episode really insightful, regardless of whether or not you join us on that, on that subscriber journey. But I'm very, very excited about this. I have a lot of big plans for our show in the future, and this will help make that possible.
Oh my God, so exciting.
Yeah,
Congrats. That's a
thank you.
really exciting part of the next adventure. I'm excited to see where it goes.
Thank you so much. That means a lot.
Fantastic. All right, rapid fire. Are you ready?
Yes.
I know that curiosity is one of the things that you prize. So we're starting the rapid fire top with By the way, all of these are fill in the blank.
Okay.
Today, I'm curious about.
Buying small local businesses.
Hmm. Before stepping on stage, I always.
Say a quick prayer.
I still get nervous when.
When I try something new, but I get equally excited because they're actually the same chemical reaction in your body.
Hmm. I know trust is important because
It's the foundation of every relationship.
community means to me.
Shared values, commitment to each other, and collective experiences.
Hmm. On this next adventure, I am most excited about.
Buying a small business with my husband.
Oh, we want to hear about that. And courage comes from.
The willingness to try something without being attached to the outcome.
Ooh, that is the perfect place to land. And it is also such a beautiful summation of this conversation and of the courage that you have taught us in real time through your
Thank
business
you.
and your being. Thank you so much, Ellen, for being here. I want to thank all of our beautiful listeners. I will see you here in this podcast next week, Sunday. This is Madam Speaker Says. Thank you for being here. Hey, pull up, pull up, pull up. Just you and me for a second. Are you an exec, a founder, or an entrepreneur who's sick of shrinking in rooms you're overqualified to lead? It's time to stop playing small and start owning your expertise. But how, Machochodi? Girl, I got you. I offer coaching that helps women of color just like you to claim your place as a thought leader. Whether you want to command a room, craft and share your signature story, or finally get that book out of your head and onto bookshelves, I've got the strategy and spicy accountability that you need. If you're tired of seeing less qualified folks shine while you stay behind the scenes, girl, the wait list is open. Follow the link in show notes to stop waiting for permission and claim your VIP spot now. My mission? Helping women just like you to snatch the spotlight, shake the table, and take your damn seat at the top already. No begging, no detours, and nope, no apologies. Just bold ass moves.